Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the Israel-Palestine Report, coming to you live, well, probably not live, from my father's basement. So you can joke all you want about me being in basements. Um, yeah, so something happened today, something fairly dramatic. The United States has, for the first time, gone to war with Israel, for Israel, adjacent to Israel, however you want um, to calculate that, and has attacked, according to many sources, destroyed the three main, known at least, sites of the Iranian nuclear program. Um, this is, without a doubt, from a strategic point of view, from a diplomatic point of view, a historic moment in the Middle East. So I thought I would come on and give an emergency episode with completely undigested, off the cuff reactions to what happened. So let's start with a little bit of a summary of what happened. So there was really no warning that this attack would happen tonight. I mean, there were clues that it was coming, but every day it seemed that there were clues that were coming. You know, there was all this buzz around B2s coming to the region, coming through Guam, et cetera, et cetera. The announcement came from Trump on social media. He announced that the U.S. has struck three Iranian nuclear sites, the Fordow facility, heavily armored, beneath ground, very difficult to bomb. And that's the real reason that the United States had to intervene. Israel didn't have, according to all reports, the ability to destroy this facility without deep bunker busting bombs, which it did not possess. It also hit the Natanz enrichment plant and the Isfahan um, facility that has near bomb grade uranium. All those facilities had been hit by Israel, but for now, Israel hadn't really made a dent in, and there were varying reports on how much damage Israel had done to the other two sites. What I just saw today on Ynet and a couple of other Israeli sources was that they didn't believe that Israel had done a lot of damage, and that would explain why there was a lot of pressure put on Trump by Israel. Um, some reports in Israel talked about Ron Dermer, Donald, and Benjamin Netanyahu putting a full court press on Trump to do so, especially when they saw resistance from people like Steve Bannon and others, and possibly J.D. Vance, according to rumors at least, and they seem to have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams in getting the United States to do so. He gave a dramatic press conference, even interrupting the Mets game, much to my chagrin. He stated, our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's number one state sponsor of terror. He said that the three sites had been completely and totally obliterated, and said there's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight. Has to be said that while serious damage to these sites is very likely, it's too early to assess what amount of damage has been done and whether or not the United States will have to step up attacks, whether Israel will do it in conjunction with them, and how this will work going into the future. There was some element of an olive branch in Trump's speech. He said, um, Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier, implying that Iran doesn't really have the ability to strike back. And of course, Israel has taken out a lot of its anti-air capabilities, but to begin with, it doesn't seem like Iran could have done much against American B-2s. Trump explained why it's an American interest, in his opinion, to attack Iran. He said for 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. And he said, if peace does not come quickly, we'll go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. According to reports, Trump updated Netanyahu a few hours before the attack. He must have been delighted at at that. He called this moment, Trump, historic for the U.S., Israel, and the world. Of course, Netanyahu praised Trump, calling it bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities and said that history will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. What did the attack consist of? Six B-2 bombers dropping bunker buster bombs on the uh, main target, and on the two lesser targets, Natanz and Isfahan, uh, they used 30 Tomahawk missiles. Following the announcement, Israel geared up for a possible response. The Home Command tightened defense guidelines, restricting gatherings and non-essential work. Israel was just talking about people returning to schools, reopening the kindergartens. That will probably have to be put on hold at this point. Mike Johnson and others praised, of course, the strike. So did John Thune. Meanwhile, the Democrats have been criticizing it, but measuredly, because, technically the lead Democrats at least still support Israel, still think that Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons. But they also think that Trump should have consulted Congress, maybe leading the U.S. into an inadvisable war, and so on and so forth. So Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the minority, said President Trump misled the country about his intentions, failed to seek congressional authorization, and risks American entanglement in a potentially disastrous war. So, what's going to happen now? What do I think is going to happen now? Well, I have no problem with the United States destroying the Iranian nuclear program. I think that Iran is a destabilizing force in the Middle East, and I think that them having a nuclear program is completely unacceptable. Of course, the question is, could the U.S. have done this through negotiations rather than through war? My hunch is yes, but that is crying over spilt milk. The real question becomes, what is the response going to be now? Iran can't allow the U.S. to achieve these goals through an attack without it paying a price. This is the Middle East. If you don't prove that you're tough, you're not going to stay in power. And right now, the Iranian regime is not very popular in Iran, of course, and a lot of what's keeping them in power is fear. So if they look weak, they're not going to be able to stay in power for much longer. So you can expect an Iranian strike on American military targets in the Middle East, something that they are set up for and something that they've done before. How will the U.S. respond militarily? Well, they'll escalate. If the U.S. escalates and Iran fires back, then what? There's a danger here that this turns into a, um, to use a very tired word, a quagmire. And there's also a danger here that this turns into uh, a military operation aimed at regime change. And of course, there's never in history been a successful regime change campaign that's only been waged in the air. Some sort of land component would be needed. Would that involve the CIA working with local opposition forces? Would that involve the IDF? Would that involve U.S. Special Forces? Would that involve larger formations? This can start to get tricky. Another thing that Iran could do to get the U.S. more heavily involved is close the Straits of Hormuz, which would cause a rise in the price of oil. That's already going to happen, but would cause a much larger increase in the price of oil, since a lot of oil goes through there. That's something that's been discussed before. Then the US Navy would have to break it open, and so on, so forth. So, is this going to end up being regime change? Is this going to end up being operation just to defang Iran from some of the threats that it presents? Then there's some questions that this raises for Israel. One of Israel's doctrinal um, benchmarks has been that it operates independently militarily. The only time it broke that was in 1956 in the Suez Crisis, something that didn't go very well. And since then, there's been an attempt not to do that. One of the reasons is that Israel has always wanted to present itself as a strategic boon to its allies, especially the United States, rather than a drag. But by bringing the United States into a war, that changes. And then, of course, you have the element of anti Semitism that could be inspired by all this. Anyone who follows social media, the tenor of anti-Semitism, talks a lot about Israel getting the U.S. involved in wars. And previous wars, incorrectly, I should state, were blamed on Israel. Like, in particular, the Second Iraq War. A lot of people blame the First Iraq War on Israel back in the day. The idea being that Israel tricked the United States into going to war with Iraq or manipulated, however you want to look at it. In this case, you don't need a conspiracy theory anymore. It's right there in the face. And of course, that comes when there's a lot of harsh criticism at Israel about its policy in Gaza. It's at its lowest popularity. And if the U.S. gets dragged into a war, what does this do to Trump's popularity? And how do Trump's supporters treat Israel? And of course, Trump's detractors, this will make Israel even less popular. And I believe that there will probably be a rise in anti-Semitic attacks if the war drags on and and escalates. And there could be the involvement of Iranian proxy forces. So far, Hezbollah has not wanted to be involved, but they could face pressure to become involved and enter into clashes. Then there's the question of, do Russia, China try to support Iran if they feel like Iran might fall? Neither one took any action on the fall of Assad. And the question is, do they regret that now? Now they see Iran might fall. Maybe they feel like this is going too far. Their proxies, their allies are starting to fall one by one. Maybe they could be next. What we could be seeing from their perspective is a resurgent United States. There might be a desire to balance it. So they could end up getting involved if Iran puts up a fight, but is in danger of being replaced. Then there's the question of how this affects nuclear proliferation. Iran didn't develop a nuclear weapon in time to prevent an attack on it. And a lot of countries will be watching and thinking, this might be a very good time to develop nuclear weapons to prevent that from happening. So we could see a sort of um, escalation of pursuit of nuclear weapons. If I'm a country that is concerned about intervention, I'd be looking at that right now. Of course, we have the humanitarian concerns from the fallout from reactors in Iran, and there's a risk of asymmetric attacks on the United States using cyber warfare, unconventional tactics, dirty bombs, etc., out of desperation to try to get some kind of punishment going against the United States. And in the case of cyber warfare, once again, we have to talk about Russia, and we have to talk about China, and we have to talk about North Korea, trying to buttress their allies. So the truth is, in the background here, we have once again the risk of world war, of the Ukrainian war and the Iranian war that is now developing, uniting into one conflict. And while Trump promised his voters that he would be a president of peace, he could end up dragging the United States into world war. Some of this depends on Trump, and mostly depends on Trump. Some of this also depends on Netanyahu. Netanyahu now finds himself in a very good position, considering where he was on October 7th, October 8th. He can now look at this war, this wider war, and point to some achievements that he couldn't point to before. Defanging Hezbollah, the overthrow of Syria, the possible destruction, or at least setting back by many years, of the Iranian nuclear program. This is a time when he can de-escalate and reach an agreement while still maintaining or gaining some political salience. So this is a time when he can really gain something further. There's nowhere left for Netanyahu to escalate to. That's good for him. He's achieved his goals. Aside from, of course, getting rid of Hamas, which is something that, in my opinion, he hasn't really tried to do in earnest. So this is a moment where he can get the hostages back and say, I achieved all these other things. I got rid of the Iranian nuclear threat. I have brought Israel to greater security. This is a good time for him to stop. But will he stop? Can he stop? Are Trump and Netanyahu now locked into continued escalation in Iran? Frighteningly, I think the answer to that might be yes. So it looks to me like we might be headed to an escalation that will end up with an attempt at regime change. And since regime change can't be achieved through the current means, that's a recipe for a continued war. And of course, the big X factor here is how will the Iranian population respond to all this? Well, we know that the a large percentage of the Iranian populace doesn't support the regime, but from most analysis that I've seen, there's a lot of people who don't like the regime, but prefer it to be reformed, and certainly prefer it over having foreigners tell them what government to have. So this could harden resistance. And Iran is a complicated country and very difficult to fight on. So, of course, we'll be following this here very closely. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon, consider subscribing to my Substack, and listening to my History of the Land of Israel podcast. I'll see you again very soon.